Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. All right. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I know we had a few hundred people, more than a few hundred people registered. So we're going to give everybody just another sort of 30 seconds to join in here. I'm going to ask everybody to throw your questions in the Q&A box. So I'm going to do a brief intro here, talk a bit about, who we are and where we came from and why we're here talking about Q&A on cold email. And then we're going to jump into answering your questions. We've got an hour here. We'll take it if we need it. But if the questions dry up before then we'll call it early. So Sujan, why don't I do a little intro about you and then we can flip it around here. So we met a couple of years ago when you were just rebranding your product Mailshake, right? Yep.
Yeah. That was interesting times. Yeah.
Yeah. We're both speaking at one of the Canadian SaaS conferences, and so Mailshakes, it's grown like crazy the last couple of years. It sounds like you guys are doing really great. You've also recently acquired another company. Was it earlier this year? Or was this last year with Voila Norbert?
It was last summer, pretty much a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So really getting our hands in the sales space, and if you think about it in terms of a workflow, we want to just be helpful to salespeople in their flow of selling and closing deals.
Gotcha. And so Mailshake is the sending some email side. And then sort of before that, Voila Norbert, I'm just struggling with that, saying that today.
It's a French name. It took me 9 months to figure out how to say it right. So Voila Norbert, or just Norbert in general. So voilanorbert.com is the website, but you could just say Norbert is the email finding side. Yeah.
Okay. So you help people find email contacts and then actually run the email campaigns.
Yep, exactly. And then we also, Mailshake customers might notice a little, some cross breeding between the two companies. Voila Norbert has an email verification side of things. So hopefully you don't do this, if you bought a list or you put together a list and you want to just confirm you got the right emails and make sure deliverability is good, just cleaning the list for you. So that's now also done in Mailshake.
Very cool.
You see, we also do email enrichment, which there's companies like Clearbit, Full Contact have done this for a long, long time. We've actually had a lot of that data for a long, long time, but now we kind of have a public version that launched. That was what launched last week. But yeah, anyways, enough about our tools and whatnot. I mean, let's talk about some cold email and sales.
Cool. Ed, before we jump in, I'm just going to say hi. I'm Colin Stewart. For those that don't know me, I'm the one of the co-founders here and co-CEO at Predictable Revenue. And so where most of my experience comes from is I spent probably 10 years selling before I co-founded a CRM company 6 years ago, which was a terrible idea. We got one customer. It's exactly what you'd expect if you imagine one of your top salespeople going and starting their own company. It was just a gong show. And so that's where a lot of my experience came from. I was selling hard goods like diesel generators and kitchen cabinetry and cell phone contracts and basically anything you can think of. I probably have tried to sell that or have sold that. And then started the CRM company. That didn't work out so well, but I'd read Aaron's book along the way, was using it to book a ton of meetings for this CRM company that nobody wanted to actually buy the product. And then some friends at the co-working space I was working out of basically convinced me to give up on my CRM dreams and start booking meetings for them. And once I started doing that, basically a few months later, Aaron and I decided to merge our two companies because he kept running into our customers and they were, being successful. And so he was thinking who is this guy that seems to be everywhere? And I was just sort of his internet stalker for a year. And then we ended up merging our two companies and we've been growing like gangbusters ever since. So that's me in 60 seconds.
Nice. Yeah. And we had a pretty long, back at SaaS North in Canada, we had a really, really long conversation, which I think led to this. So 2 years in the making, I guess.
Yeah.
I think of both of us chasing each other down. But we got a time, we got this going. and so it looks like questions are coming in. And, I think we've, prior to like the prep for this, we have like about 15 of our own questions that Colin and I always get asked. So how do you want to do this? You want to just jump in from the questions top to bottom?
Yeah, let's have a look here, because we can maybe try and organize this just a little bit. So, we're seeing a couple of comments around sort of what's the high level strategy. I'm seeing one about, best practices for building lists. We can answer that one just using over.
There you go.
On lists. So why don't we start with what's the right strategy? Because we've got questions around, talk to us about A/B testing and the open rates, CTAs and stuff like that. So when you think about your cold outreach strategy, Sujan, we're obviously doing this for a reason, right? We're trying to book some meetings. What sort of outputs are you expecting to see from a campaign that one SDR is running?
Yeah. So, ultimately my gauges are people opening, responding, and booking meetings, right? And it could fail at any point, any part of those flow, right? So if I'm getting opens, maybe I've got something good that's compelling, but I'm losing them, right? So then it's like, if I'm getting opens, I'm looking at the copy and seeing what's wrong with it or how I can improve it. If I'm getting opens and replies, then what's wrong with my flow of booking, right? Maybe I use something like Calendly or whatnot to kind of get the booking meeting right then and there. But ultimately, the right strategy really depends, in my opinion, on who you're going after. If you're selling tractors or tractor repairs, well, one, you're probably talking to farmers or distributors of, farm goods. I don't know. Like, you're talking to people who do this, right? They're using the tractors, or they have tractors and they need fixing, right? So think about getting their minds and figure out, like, one, who else sells them, right? Mm-hmm. And what are they doing to sell them? So what I'm saying is, I'm saying, go take a look at your competitors, take a look at anyone else who's selling to your audience or customer, and figure out what they're doing. Are they doing outbound sales? Are they doing TV? Are they doing door-to-door sales, right? Actually, I know a lot about selling tractor parts. Oddly, from my couple of years living in Minnesota, a friend of mine company did this, and they did it door-to-door.
No way.
Yeah, and it worked. And they tried all these other things, and door-to-door was a thing, right? And so they did outbound sales via phone, and they did a lot of prospecting, but all the prospecting did was got the address, and they got field salespeople to go door to door. But again, my point being here is figure out who you're selling to and what makes them tick, what they're reading, and who else is selling to them. Because one, you need to be unique in your pitch, but you also want to be aware of, like, hey, you're probably getting sold on TV. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go this way, right? And you can acknowledge that and stand out that way. But that's my first stab of figuring out what would be a remotely good strategy. I'll throw the question back at you. Maybe you want to take it from here.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about sort of like personalizing it to them. I think there's so many blog posts and there's so much content out there that's produced by somebody that has a vested interest in selling you a product or telling you that you're going to get great response rates. And if you look at the companies that are running these campaigns, they're all brand new software tech companies. So if you're not one of those, if you're selling farm equipment, if you're one of those more traditional businesses, you've been around for a while, you need to take their response rates with a grain of salt, because it's not an apples to apples comparison. Like if you're running a campaign for Uber targeting restaurants, you're going to get a bonkers response rate, because one, they've got a great offering for restaurants, and two, everybody knows who you are, right? So you're like, as somebody who's selling tractor parts to farmers, you're not going to get the same 30, 40, even 20% response rate that somebody that large is. I think that's an important piece to think about, when you're, whenever you're, listening to people like us or reading a blog post and you're trying to compare, like, what am I doing differently? Is it a fair comparison between, okay, these guys are selling something that's never been done before. It's a, game changing, innovative product versus, are we in the, and they got a great brand. Are we in the exact same situation? I think that's sort of the first thing I want to think about when I'm thinking about what's the strategy, and I'm listening to all of these thought leaders that say all of these different things and say, this is how you get 20% response rates. And so sort of that aside, I love what you're talking about when it comes to getting to know your customers. And I know this is not something that I thought of. This is something that I'm stealing from, I think I learned this in marketing, when I was doing my degree, but it was basically the best copy that you can use on a customer is their own words. And barring that, it's somebody else's words who are exactly like them. So if we're selling to farmers, the best way to write great messaging for farmers is to talk to other farmers that are ideally your customers and see how they talk about your product. And because it's those nuggets that are really going to help you sort of resonate with your customers, right? And that resonance is when you're sort of on the same wavelength, you're using the same terms. What you're trying to convey is empathy and understanding over email. And it's really challenging to do when there's no tone or context around it. You just have sort of, a few characters on a screen. And sometimes it's just, whatever the preview on their phone is, right? So you're really not getting a ton of time in that. So your opportunity to really nail it is very small.
Yeah, I would say you've got less than 10 seconds if you can get the open rate, right? All they're doing is somebody's gauging whether they should give a crap or not, right? Not even like, are they interested? Are they like, is this spam or not, right? Like clearing their inbox. And maybe, depending, let's just keep with the farmer or target tractor example, they don't probably get as many emails, or they probably don't check their email as often, right? So like the cadence for somebody like a farmer, maybe it's not every 7 days, maybe it's every 2-3 weeks, because you get them in a 7-day. Let's say you send them an email, 2 emails in 7 days, and they check their emails every 7 days. Now they got 2 things from you, and what are they going to read? If they see 2, maybe they're going to think of it as a promotional thing, and it doesn't make it, right? And so it gets filtered out.
Yeah, I'm laughing because we actually had it. So I've always, when I've explained like predictable revenue, and I always used to use the phrase like, oh, if I'm emailing farmers in Nebraska, I'm probably doing it wrong. And then we had a customer who was in ag tech, and they're like, oh, we actually want to email farmers in California and Nebraska. So we actually ran these campaigns, and the data is hard to find. We had to, basically like hand build it. But yeah, we had great response rates, just like you're saying.
Absolutely. And you brought up a good point around like, there's people talking about out there, there's a lot of content, but there's no context. They don't have the context to your business. You have to read the templates, the advice you get, and figure out how you can apply any of that stuff to you. So one of the things I do when writing copy, I really suck at, like, when I look at a blank screen, I really suck at writing and starting. So I start with a template, and I read the template. I read a bunch of different templates out there, and I figure out what's the angle, what's the template with an angle that I want to use, and that's my starting point. And then I just actually pick up my phone as if I'm making a call, and I record myself pitching, like, out loud on the phone, that person I'm targeting. And I record it, and I go back and listen to it, and I actually revise and create a template based off of that. For me, when I read out loud, when I say things out loud, I would say I talk differently than I write. I write very more formal, but I talk as if I'm having a conversation. And so as a result of doing this process, for me, my copy is a lot more conversational and more layman's, and just kind of more relatable, which I find works really well for farmers or tech people. But if I was talking to accountants, again, if you did your research, and this is another example I've done a lot of work with, accountants or people in the UK are more formal, and accountants in the UK are very formal. If you had a grammatical error, or you did not talk in a formal tone, they will dismiss your service as unprofessional. So whereas if I emailed somebody in the tech world or at Uber with a formal tone, they will dismiss me as a bullshit company, right? Like, they don't so
you want to calibrate it to, what they expect.
Exactly. And so that to me is the right strategy, is understanding, calibrating, and adjusting the pitch. Colin, there's one thing I want to talk about within this is, I think a lot of people talk about personalization. And there's like this amount of personalization, 25%, 30%. what's your take on kind of personalization? How much do you personalize? Is it every email? Is it one part of email? What's your take on that?
I think, so my opinion, there's really two approaches that you either have to go all in on writing something that's hyper personalized, that you're probably spending a significant amount of time, 20, 30 minutes on like really researching this individual because this is one of your top, 1% accounts. And that, the email is going to be well thought out. You'll have done a ton of research on the company. You'll understand who they are as a buyer persona and how your service might impact them. You'll have sort of a reference customer ready to talk. Like there's that very personalized, this is like the old school basho method, where you're sending sort of longer emails. You've got a much higher touch strategy. So it's not just one email. It's not just the phone. It's not just social. It's everything, and the kitchen sink. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And that's like that's what I do, or what we do for our top 1% of customers. And then for everybody else, you sort of need to, we're always testing a lot of different tactics, and we're definitely, I don't want to say that we're sort of, we're not the be all end all, but we've done a lot of testing and a lot of work. And what we're finding is that for some businesses, a certain level of personalization can be very effective. For others, what's been most effective is to sort of, instead of personalizing it down to the individual level, we're personalizing it into their job role. Right. So
that's, yeah. And if you can do that at scale too, right?
Exactly. Because if you think about like, what are the ways that I could personalize, let's air quotes here, personalize this email, right? I think at the highest level, the easiest way you can do it is to the industry, right? You're going to pull a list of all the companies in this industry or this zip code and say, okay, I deal with a lot of customers here. I'm going to pull this list. I'm going to write my content to, people in this industry. So people that sell tractor parts, right? And then the next sort of level, down from that, so that's fairly easy to do, right? I think the next level down is to write it to the sort of the individual persona. So not to the individual person, but within this industry, we know that there are, let's call them chief tractor part purchasers, officers. And, I'm going to write it to that buyer persona. So all my content is going to be specific to that individual because I know that there are hundreds of them out there. I happen to have a couple of customers that I can call and I can run my messaging by them and say, hey, does this make sense to you? Because, I think the one thing that, a new SDR is going to struggle with is making sure that you're hitting that tone and doing all that research. And so that's a big piece for me, is making sure that we're having, the conversations with our prospects about, this is what we're writing about. So that's basically it's industry, then it's persona, then it's to the company, right? So the next level is to the company, and I keep changing the direction that my hand's going here. So I'm just going to stop. But the next one is the company, because if you're reaching out to multiple people at the company, you can write content just for, ABC Farm Incorporated. And you're still getting a multiple on that. And then there's the highest level of personalization, and that's directly to the individual, right? And so that's the one, that sort of one-on-one touch. That's the top 1% of all our accounts that we'll do that for. And then we break it down into tiers sort of below that, and we have varying sort of playbooks for each tier. But really, I think what we found most effective is to really find that sweet spot. Is it, are people going to most, where are you going to get the best response rates? It's going to vary for every different person that's on this webinar, right? We've helped hundreds of companies build outbound email campaigns. I think we've helped them close millions of, more than tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And the one thing we found is that there is no one silver bullet, no one secret, no, glorious template that if I told you you're going to get a 20% response rate, the only thing that you can do to really continue to push it forward and get better is to listen to all the things that are working for us and are working for your peers, and test. Because I could give you my exact template that I ran for a competitor of yours, and it won't work for you because the context is different. The people you're reaching out to are going to be different. You're going to get different results.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great point that it's all about the context and the personalization at the persona level. Mm-hmm. I like that area to play around with because it's scalable, right? Like for example, my role at my companies is marketing, head of marketing. You can say chief marketing officer. I'm interested as the persona chief marketing officers are interested in hiring in marketing, right? Like maybe conferences to attend or speak at or whatever, right? Like there's things as a chief marketing officer you can say that they're interested in, So if you target too many, if you target me as an individual, I care about skydiving and motorcycles. You have no way of knowing that without spending, you can spend like 5 minutes, but you have no way of finding that out about the tractor guys, right? Mm-hmm. There's just no way. And so like, I think personalization works at that level. I'm getting a couple questions. I think we can talk about maybe talk about A/B testing and the process for testing.
For sure. I think just to do Dan a favor, because we started off the question with, the one I clicked, let's answer was what's an appropriate open rate, response rate, click-through rate, et cetera. And we just went off into tangent land. And then we came back and we didn't actually answer his question. So I think open rates from my experience, and I think here's the trick. Every email tool calculates this a little bit differently. So take my numbers with a grain of salt. But I think just to keep it nice and wide, anywhere between 20 and 40% open rates. And the cool thing is that you can do is actually, you can test this out and just, it's not necessarily the overall open rate that's the most important piece. It's sort of the trend. If you're getting below 10%, down in, anywhere below 10%, you probably have an issue with deliverability. If it's somewhere in between, right, I think the thing that you can do is test your subject line, right? If you have a generic subject line, there's a lot that you can play around with there. If you look at the response rate, Sujan, what do you guys see? What do you like to see from Mailshake?
I mean, I think it's on the open rate, right? But I would say somewhere in the like 3 to 10% range is acceptable. If you're going anything under 3, if it's high volume, meaning like
for a response rate, right?
For a response rate, yeah. Anything below that, you have room for improvement. Usually, the biggest problem with response rate, the biggest culprit of a bad response rate is you don't have a clear call to action, or it's really, really hard, big ask, right? Like, let's jump on a call in 30 minutes and bust out your credit card to join, right? Like, and we're going to take an hour, like we're going to take 5 emails back and forth to schedule it. Super low friction ask, visit this website, have a question, whatever. Or super low friction ask is your whole email has 2 sentences and it's a question and ends with a question. Obviously you're going to get a high response rate.
Mm-hmm. I think you sort of hit on something, and it's the clarity of the call to action. Right. I see that I've worked with so many SDRs and people that are writing emails. The number of times where I've seen multiple question marks in an email, in your first cold email, it's insane. Like, which one of these questions do you want me to answer?
Yeah. So it kind of goes back to 2 things in my mind. And this is all about the strategy here. One is, what do you want the person to do? Like, you want them to feel, you want them to read the thing, right? But like, what's the purpose of the email? Like, there is usually very, very when you go and after you write the email, you're like, what's the purpose of the email again? I forgot, because it's you're digging into the weeds a lot and you have all these different ideas, angles, and you've read a lot of contradicting advice. And then the second thing is, what's the outcome I'm looking for from this email, right? Like, so I actually just wrote, like, we just finalized and hit send right before this on outbound sales emails for Voila Norbert's verification service. So we're targeting marketing people, specifically people that are email marketing. And we're asking, what we're essentially saying is, like, if you verify your email list, which is a very true fact, if you verify your email list, you will get lower spam rating and higher deliverability and better open rates. Ultimately, that's what we're selling. But like, when we reread that email, what we were actually asking them to do was to check like 4 things on their website, on their email, in their ESP or their email marketing or marketing automation tool, and then answer back, right? and we simplify that down. But ultimately what I'm saying is like very, very clear call to action. And like clear also means like no copy around it, right? Like maybe paragraph spacing that makes it very clear, right? I look at emails the same way I look at a landing page, right? Like there's a big bad headline, and that's your opening line. That may be your subject line. And at the, below, somewhere below that, you have screenshots, other stuff that support why you are qualified to say that this big bad headline. And then at the bottom somewhere and above the fold, you have a call to action button. It's big. It's usually contrasting colors. It's bright red, blue, whatever. It's short and sweet. And then it takes you to sign up or do something, right? It's the same thing in an email.
It's funny. You think about it as a landing page. I think about it as a conversation, a very strange, chopped up conversation.
Yeah.
And what you need to do is, like, if I were to meet you in a bar, I'm not just going to be like, hi, predictable revenue. We do this and this and this. You're like, hey, I'm Colin. What's your name? You're going to ask, you're going to engage them a little bit. I found and it depends on depends on who you're emailing. You want to get straight to the point of, this is why we're reaching out, right? The call to action doesn't always have to be, can you meet tomorrow? Right. I think if you can craft one tactic that's been super powerful for us is we call them insightful questions. And the whole goal of these insightful questions are to build rapport and build some momentum in the conversation, right? Because if you think about do you use Salesforce, right? It's the CRM that, most large organizations use, right? If we're trying to sell, a sales tool in there, asking them, hey, do you use Salesforce is a very easy yes or no answer for them. But once they've answered one question, they're more likely to answer another, right? It's sort of that principle of, it's one of Robert Cialdini's influence principles. It's sort of along the lines of that sort of psychological investment. Once they've made some investment in that conversation, they're more likely to make larger investment. Right. And so if you can ask these, string together these chains of insightful questions to sort of build up to something. And then eventually, once you realize that, hey, this person is qualified, we can drive a ton of value for them, going in for the call to action there. And then saying, hey, let's book a meeting. It's not going to work. It's not going to be more effective in all of the cases, but it's definitely one thing that you can try if you're struggling and saying, hey, this initial CTA, or I'm not getting a great response rate here. And by running people through a chain like this, where you're asking sort of one question at a time, and then your sort of follow-ups are all these different questions, it'll help you understand and really understand the people that you're emailing. Are they really your target market? Are they actually who you thought they were? Because it's so easy to focus on, am I getting a good response rate? Am I getting a good open rate? And if you're emailing the wrong people, it doesn't really matter. If you're trying to sell, like Sujan, if you were trying to sell Mailshake to farmers in Nebraska, you're probably not going to get a great response rate. So I think the piece here is using the data, right? The open rates, the response rates, I don't really track too much the click-through rate. That's more, I'm not actually a fan of,
I'm with you.
Of click tracking. I think the only reason why you would do click tracking is if you're going to use that as a call trigger. Otherwise, what's happening, and no matter what tool you're using, is you're sending out an email with this long string that's going to get detected by spam filters and saying, oh, they're sending out the same link over and over and over again. And they're going to think it's part of a spam bot.
Yeah.
But,
so
go ahead.
I actually want to jump in there and dive in real quickly on that part. We've talked to a lot of our competitors. As a collective, we've all agreed to help improve our tracking as a group. And I can tell you that everybody has the same problem. Tracking using a tracking link is always going to have diminishing results. In the beginning, you may not see an effect, but you send a campaign long enough, it's going to get diminishing results. So specifically things the ESPs and spam filters and getting these companies look out for essentially is short tracking links. So Bitly, right? Any type of short link, that's automatic flag. Any long link, so the opposite of that, UTM filters, things that are long, dragged out, those also get triggered as spam. it's not that they're like, think about like when you get an email marketing, like a newsletter or like a promotion from Macy's or Nordstrom. How many links are in that email? How long are those links? How many images are in the links? Do the exact opposite of what those guys do, and you'll avoid the spam filter.
Exactly. Go look in your spam filter and look at the language they're using. I guarantee if you put Viagra in your subject line,
it will not get
directly to spam.
Exactly. Like, so there's free dollar signs.
Dollar signs.
That's really bad. Use of capitalization is bad too. Like if you have everything in all caps, that's bad. And then the other part is like, if you use the same copy, that's, let's just say we found, you and I come with this award-winning tractor selling copy, but we use it 1,000,000 times, it's going to diminish in success. And there's going to be cliffs where they just drop down. And that's where that's usually a deliberate thing where it got caught in the Outlook spam filter, or it got caught in this and that and the other. So you really need to personalize and personalize at scale, like we talked about. But you want to change up maybe 10-15% of your copy in an email, right? And so that's really, really important. And again, the more you send the same exact email over and over again, the worse it's going to get. And that's also why you should be careful. I'm throwing like 10 things out at once. Yeah. That's also why you should be very, very careful about taking a template with face value and copying it exactly, because by the time a template is shared, it's usually used and abused.
100%. I want to build on this because what you said there is super important, and I don't think anybody's asked this yet, but it's one thing that's impacting, I guarantee is impacting everybody, and nobody's asking about it. So I'm guessing you're not thinking about it, which is your deliverability, right? If you're sending the exact same template over and over and over again, like Sujan said, your response rates are going to go down. But really like a lot of the spam filters have been evolving pretty dramatically, especially Google's in the last couple of years. And what they're looking for now is reputation and engagement. Those are the two biggest factors. So do your emails, when you send them out, do people respond? Is there multiple conversations stemming from those, right? And then the second piece is, do you have a good reputation as somebody who sends high quality email? And I think if you're continuing to send the same template and you're watching your response rates tick off and you keep hammering away without changing them up, or anything like that, you're gonna you run the risk of doing permanent damage to or maybe not permanent, but semi-permanent damage to your domain, to your reputation as somebody who sends good email.
I would say permanent. It's hard to it's hard to, once you have a bad ratio of response and you scale to tens of thousands, it's really hard to send enough high value emails to make up and get yourself into a decent reputation. These reputation factors reset, or they have their time base, and they may give you like say 7 days or 2 weeks, you're kind of like in the doghouse, but then back to normal after that. But like you keep repeating it because again, none of these places are very transparent with their filters. That's also intentional, right, to avoid abuse. But one of the things I found, like, to help solve that is, in my first emails, I always have the premise of my first email is to get a response, and it's a question. It's just like a 2-3 sentence max email that just says like you said, are you using Salesforce? That could be it, right? Like, you don't get a sales email often that just says, are you using Salesforce? And like, you're more likely to respond, and you're going to be like, who is this person, right? So then it's like, okay, who is this person? I need to build in trust and social proof. So then now my email signature matters, right? So think about like the other person's perspective of when you send a 1-sentence email that says, are you using Salesforce? You look at the person's signature, it's like, maybe they're a Salesforce consultant. Maybe they're from Salesforce, right?
Yeah, they have to infer the context from your email signature, really.
And that all means like the things around it help, but it could mean they respond more because they're curious. But anyways, we could talk about this a lot.
Yeah, we were joking before this that we could just jump in here and just have a conversation about email for a couple hours without anybody asking any questions. So we do have 21 open questions. Let's try and power through some of these.
Let's do it.
So, Sujan, what's your strategy for A/B testing?
Yeah, so I always start with A/B testing. I will go and take like, let's give you the live example. Voila Norbert, we're doing outbound tests for verification, selling to email marketing people.
Yeah.
We've got 1,000 people in the prospect list. That's our test. 250 emails are being tested with 2 different subject lines and two different complete emails, complete email sequences.
Gotcha.
The winning one we'll refine it from there to then test what gets the best response rate. So first test is what's a kind of a deep, like it's like a bar of where we stand and what's a good open rate. And then from there, it's how we improve the reply rates.
Gotcha. I'd say the same thing. The only thing that we do a little bit differently is because I found that context is king, especially in these responses, and a reply rate isn't always a reply rate. I've had 10% response rates where everybody's telling me to kindly leave them alone, obviously, very kindly. And I've had 10% response rates where everybody's like, holy crap, I can't believe you do this. Like, can I get on the phone tomorrow? And I think so when you're doing some of this testing, one thing I always recommend is to sort of just keep a tally, keep a spreadsheet, look at the positive responses, right? If you can, there's ways of grouping them. And there's, I've got an article, if you look back at I think it's on my LinkedIn, where basically it teaches you how you search for the template that you sent out and you apply a label that relates to template variation A. And then when you're going through, it's your emails automatically labeling them. And then as you're going through and responding, you just mark them positive, neutral, negative. So that after you've gone through your test, you can look, and you don't have to go through negative, but if you just mark the positives or even star the positives, or if you have some method of, over the 100 responses that we got out of that 1,000-person test, which one generated the most positives? Because that's really what we want at the end of the day. It's positives, then it's meetings, then it's closed sales. Right? We're not going to see how many closed sales it generated by just looking in your inbox. But one thing you can do very easily is just look at the positive responses.
Absolutely.
I think the next one up here, we got Jacqueline. Have you guys found LinkedIn Sales Nav useful? In-mails, any experience? I'm a big fan. I hate in-mails. I don't want to give LinkedIn any more money than I already do. I'm a huge fan of the connect. So you build a list in Sales Nav. You build a big list. You connect with a bunch of people. I do not, and everybody else says do the opposite, but I do not personalize that connection note. I just click add. And then as soon as people accept my invite, LinkedIn actually ticks you a notice in its messenger tool. And then I just go and fire them my email, or fire them my conversation or my template of what I was looking for. And then a couple follow-ups from there. We found that to be super effective, not just for prospecting for customers, but also prospecting for talent. We use that to hire our last VP of sales and the last two hires that we made, before that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in-mail and then also the personalized connect message is often overlooked. In-mail just kind of stands out with in-mail. Like it's like, hey, I'm selling you something. It's like, it just adds a label of advertisement oftentimes. But yeah, I have success in a similar vein. The other thing is engaging with them after you connect with them. Mm-hmm. You can always follow them, right? So follow is always the option. A bit more manual work, but just engage with some of their posts so that they see your name, especially with LinkedIn promoting their newsfeed a lot more. Yeah. Engage with some of their content, and then email them or then message them.
That's a great point. And also keep in mind, this is still a numbers game. So the majority of people that you reach out to are not going to reply to you, and that's totally okay.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So we got Dan, best practices for building a target list, and where do we get the contact info from?
Yeah. So I'm a little biased here, Voila Norbert, right? But yeah, look, in all seriousness, that's one tool. That's hey, you've got the name and company of the person you're trying to target. Now you just need the contact information. What if you don't know the name? What if you don't know, you just know kind of, you want to target CMOs? I would use something like DuckSoup, DuxSoup, or Snoov, Snov.io. They're like a robust kind of tool. There's a lot of tools out there for sales prospecting. I found like kind of like pulling from LinkedIn and using Sales Navigator is a great one to be the best. What's your take? I by the way, I very rarely find buying a list ever works out.
Yeah, I think there's certain contexts and cases where buying lists can work. I think there's a couple providers. I don't think they're really a competitor of yours, but Discover.org, if you're targeting engineering companies in that sort of engineering space, they do an amazing amount of research, and they'll show you the organization chart, who they report to, who reports to them, that sort of thing. They go crazy deep, and it's a whole different level. If you like, I think what's a contact for you is like in the 10 cents range from Norbert.
Yeah, like highest price would be 10 cents, and it kind of goes down to
with tools like Discover.org, you're going to be significantly more. It's a much larger investment, and you're going to get access to the whole data pool. So it's a totally different model. It's a totally different a way of looking at it. I think it really comes down to who you're targeting, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
what filters exist. And I think people are a little bit too reliant on the filters of whatever tool you're using to build the list. I think one of the best ways of building a list that is going to be good is on LinkedIn, right? You can dial in. You've got all these Boolean searches that you can do. If you're curious what a Boolean search is, I interviewed Cole Fox on our podcast. He used to be at a company that focused a lot on data and building good lists. And he's got a ton of great tips on how you can sort of really utilize LinkedIn to maximize your list building capabilities. But I'm a big fan of sort of starting there, building out your target list there, and then using tools like Norbert to grab the contact information. I think it's probably the cleanest way, where you're most likely to get a representative sample of the types of companies that you really are looking for and need, and you're not going to get any of the craft. Because if you look at any of those databases, you're going to put in an industry or a SIC code, something like that. You're essentially relying on these SIC codes that who knows how they were matched out. And in some cases, they're it was on their tax return, and there's some accountant that sort of reported and said, yeah, we're in the packaged software business, right? Like that's actually one of the SIC codes. There's no like SaaS software company filter. So I think that's something to keep in mind when you're building those lists. LinkedIn is probably the easiest and low hanging fruit there.
Yeah. And one thing to add that I don't think people are asking is scrubbing your list. So scrubbing your list is very, very important. One, automated tools and all that stuff are great. You can use Vol and Norbert. You can use many tools out there, right? But you also can use a human being, and should, to get context, right? So like you want to remove, I say, always remove the Bill Gates of the world, right? Like the billionaires, the people just so out of their reach that like tools, any filters you set up, they're just going to bring these people because they're well connected, right? Like on LinkedIn, if you put in CEOs in San Francisco, you're going to probably find some pretty big CEOs that you probably never want to pitch, and use that one bullet you have to sell them on something with that. Or they probably don't even check their emails. But the other thing is all that information you get, the company name, the title, all that stuff can be screwed up, formatting. Like not saying like the formatting will be like there'll be weird characters. I'm saying you might see a list where my name is referenced as Mailshake LLC. If anybody emails me with Mailshake LLC, it better be my accountant, or our CFO, or our lawyer.
Yeah.
Anybody else has Mailshake LLC, I think they're selling me some crap, right?
100%. We get the same thing with Predictable Revenue TM, because that's the name in LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. So all these things, or like an emoji, right? Like I have, back in the day with LinkedIn, you could put a little emoji in front of your name and you show up higher on a list because it's alphabetical and emoji is like not a character, right? Or it's the highest character in the alphabet. So yeah, just filter for stuff like that. And that's really important.
Perfect. So we got 15 minutes left. We're going to go lightning round on some of these. So is there a different cold email strategy when the industry requires some education for the product? So an example being trying to sell technology to the insurance industry, but it's a slow adopting industry.
The short answer is absolutely. You should be educating, right? Value add. If you have to convince or change their behavior, in my opinion, you need content. You need content anyways, because you need to get them to buy into whatever the heck the change is, and then obviously you're the solution that maybe does that change. But yeah, I think the short answer is yeah.
100%. I totally agree on the content piece. I think case studies are a huge part of the content piece, especially when you think about the technology adopter lifecycle curve. If you look up TALC, T-A-L-C by Jeffrey Moore, there's a great graphic that basically sort of shows you've got on this side, I think the camera's inverted, so I'll try and do this right. You've got your early adopters, you've got your innovators that are most likely to adopt the technology. And then there's the early adopters. Early majority, late majority, laggards. And think about the insurance industry. Where is somebody within that industry going to fall on this curve? It's probably her late majority, laggards, sort of in that range. There's a much higher burden of proof that you're going to need to show those individuals to get them to convert. Case studies are massively helpful. Also, keep in mind, we're not selling technology, we're selling a solution to their problem. So keep yourself in the solution and pain space. Hey, I noticed, companies in your industry also suffer or struggle with this, and it's costing them, X dollars. Again, don't put the dollar sign in there because it'll drop your response rates, right? But keep yourself pull yourself out of talking about the technology and focus on the pain and how you can help them. All right. Next one. What is too creepy to put in a cold email after stalking buyers when trying to relate to them, but not too pushy? I would say if you had a picture of them that you took, that's probably too creepy.
If you have a picture of the prospect that you're selling to, you've done more than enough research. You should be selling a little earlier.
If there are grounds that they could get a restraining order on you, then probably that you've gone too far. But I'll give you an example. Like I was Aaron's internet stalker for about a year before we ended up merging our companies. And partway through that, it was probably more like 6 months of like real stalking. But I found his personal email. I found his work email. I found a bunch of presentations he'd put online. I found a bunch of his old content. He'd be on webinars, sort of like we are now, and I'd be shooting him emails or texting him going, hey, I noticed that, Sujan said this about your methodology and it sort of conflicts, or said this about his methodology and it sort of conflicts with yours. So I'd be getting to that level of stuff. I don't think it's creepy. I think you're doing your research. It's called social selling. You're putting the effort in. Again, if you're actually stalking them and following them around with a camera, that's my opinion. That's the line. But I think almost anything before that, you're fine. What do you think? So
yeah, I totally agree. Please, people need to do more. Go towards the creepy zone.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, everyone, the industry as a whole is in the I don't give a crap about you, where's your credit card zone.
Yeah. I think it's funny. Every time we see a new methodology come out, or you're trying to teach something new to somebody, there's always those that go, I wouldn't respond to that. That wouldn't work on me. There's this sort of resistance because you think that you are exactly like the buyer. But when you know what, you're probably mostly right. If you're getting a 10% response rate on an email, that means 90% of the people said no. But it also means 10% of the people said yes. So I think just being a little bit more open to trying a bunch of different things and just pushing yourself a little bit farther than you might be comfortable with. All right, here's a great one from Mike. How do you craft a good subject line?
I use the headline formula that Upworthy has used for a long time. Upworthy, like the, Publisher 2.0, last half decade, they've been publishing clickbaity stuff for a long time. So I look at clickbaity stuff. I write 25 different subject lines. Lots of those are really bad. Most of them are really bad, but out of the practice comes refinement. And I weed all the crappy stuff out. I try to stick to things that are engaging, short and sweet, and and different. What I mean by different is that everybody's probably doing one thing. I want to not do that one thing. I want to, usually by doing 1 and 2, I'm avoiding that. But that's kind of my starting point. I just write things down, and they start with really long sentences, and somewhere down the road they get to like short and sweet. At some point they get to be like, is this guy drunk? And I choose one of them in the middle, and then I test.
So what is that framework? Because you were telling me a bit about it before we jumped on and started recording the webinar here.
Yeah. So the framework I use in terms of writing emails is the AIDA framework: attention, interest, desire, action. If you check out the mailshake.com/masterclass, that has a whole like section or chapter on there's 7 or 8 different types of frameworks that you could use. This is copywriting 101 stuff. So if you really want to know about copywriting or sales copywriting frameworks, just Google that. There's hundreds of articles on that. But stick to a framework. Why I suggest a framework is that like the framework is based off of psychology and test. Anything you write is based off of whatever idea you came up with. If you can write something off of a framework, it's a good starting point, and then you can adjust and test to perfection.
Perfect. I don't think I have anything else to add other than, maybe like throwing some variables in the subject line. Putting people's name, question mark, putting their company name. As long as you've got clean data, you're not going to put Mailshake LLC, right? That's a dead giveaway that I didn't actually send you this email. So things like that, variables, I think are fantastic.
Exactly.
All right.
So I got a question for you.
Sure.
We'll go back and forth here, so it's breaks it up a little bit. What's a good time frame for a company that's getting into outbound sales campaigns to get traction? Like, how long does it take?
Man, glad you asked, because I hear this all the time from people that read the book and said it didn't work, and then people that read the book and it took longer than they expected. 12 to 18 months, right? The time frame for actually getting something valuable out of it. Now, I think you're going to start to see in the early days, you'll see responses, you'll see booked meetings, but keep in mind when you're building a sales development team, you're not just doing something new. You're building an entire new team, right? If you're building a whole new function within your company, there's no way you're going to get it right the very first time. And so thinking about that in the first couple of meetings that you're going to book are not going to turn into closed sales. What it's going to take, 3 months to really get your messaging worked out. It's going to take another 3 months to get your process fine-tuned so that when you're booking meetings, you're either going to the right person, that person is having the right kind of call, right? So it's going to take you a good 6 months of testing and iterating to really get all that worked out, right? We're not even factoring in hiring the right people and getting the systems and tooling. That can add another 3 to 6 months, right? And then basically after that 6 months of you've got all those pieces worked out, it's going to be a couple of sales cycles after that. So whatever your sales cycle is, sort of typically, if it's an inbound sales cycle, you probably want to double it. And also keep in mind that when we're cold outbounding to people, we're reaching them outside of a buying cycle or outside of their buying window. So you're going to have some, like for an example, we hired an SDR 11 months ago. We didn't get a closed deal out of him for the first 6 months. But since then, we've gotten 6 deals. Right? Mm-hmm. It just took that time. So at 12 months, we're absolutely ROI positive, but it took 6 months of no results. We were seeing definitely positive signals. He was hitting his targets. But it was the first deal that closed, which was back in, I want to say March or April, was a deal that he had initially reached out to for the first time in September. So it does take time. Absolutely.
And one thing you hit on that I want to just elaborate here is that you mentioned you had positive signals. So it's not like 12 months of nothing, no sign of success. And then you hit, it's 12 months of building to it. Oh, I got the open. Oh, I got the reply down. Oh, I got the meeting booked. Oh, I got the sale, right? Mm-hmm. For some reason I'm working in charts here, not success. But ultimately it does, you have to have signs of positive movement. Otherwise you clearly are doing 12 months of something that's not working.
Absolutely.
You very, very clear difference. So remember that, Andy.
Absolutely. And before we move on, I want to build on one piece before I ask Sujan the next question. But I think the biggest area where most companies go wrong with outbound is they write emails, they get all excited and they buy a bunch of tools and they buy a bunch of data and they're writing emails, they're getting responses, which are super exciting. Then they're booking meetings for their sales team, which is great, but the meetings don't go anywhere. And that's because the reps are thinking they're going to be almost exactly the same as an inbound meeting. That's the absolute wrong way to handle it. These are such a different beast from an inbound meeting. You almost want a different rep to handle them the first time. Because if you're expecting them to have the same, to use the same script on them, to have the same level of interest and engagement, you're totally, you're not going to do well. And all these meetings are going to seem like garbage. We need to keep in mind that the context here is we are adding something into their schedule that they weren't planning, right? We don't know where they are within their buying window, and they might be super, super early. So this might be a deal that you're going to close, not today, but 9 months down the road. And the big mistake that most new account execs or SDRs make is to try and close them right now. And if there's nothing if this client or this prospect isn't going to do any business with me in the next 90 days, then I don't want to talk to them. And that's absolutely the wrong approach. I see too many salespeople do it, and it's just, you're wasting all these fabulous resources. One of the best parts of having an SDR team is the compound value that it brings to you. If you think about it, if you're getting 10 new conversations every month, let's say 3 of them are good. One of them might turn into an opportunity in the next 90 days. The other sort of 2 are good ones, but they're not there quite yet. That's 3 new ops every month that 1, you've got a chance of working, and 2 aren't going to go anywhere now, but are going to close in 6 to 12 months. Right? If you're adding that into your pipeline every month, and you're consistently working it, that's when that's where real companies get huge value out of sales development teams. If you're just using these as one and done, treating them as inbound marketing leads, and then you have one conversation and say, this didn't go anywhere, you're not going to go anywhere with your sales development efforts. Sorry. That's good. That means a lot to me that I see a lot of people doing wrong, and I couldn't let that go.
Absolutely. So we've got 3 minutes. Let's answer 3 questions. Cool. Melissa asked, what application do you recommend to implement a campaign for scheduling emails? And Calendly on the top of that list, or requesting availability. Look, I think the tools that you use are irrelevant until you figure out the flow, the strategy. And, if you're going to try to book, if you're selling to like a place where you need 3 people to jump on a call, a Calendly link, whatever the best tool in the space for booking a meeting might not work, because they're going to have to meet internally, figure out a time. They're going to talk 3 times before you even hear back from them. They might loop in somebody else. Like, that's not about convenience there. It's about getting the deal and being persistent. But if you're like talking to one person, you just need that booking of a demo. Yeah, Calendly is a great tool for that. But it really, really depends on kind of how you need, what your strategy. What would you say?
So I'm a big Calendly fan. I use Calendly myself. For more complex deals, we also use Chili Piper. The one thing, no matter what tool you're using, even if you're using your own, you can do this in Google Calendar. It's a bit hideous, and I don't use that. I used to, but the tool doesn't really matter. It's the process, like you said. I'm not a big fan of SDRs that will say, "Hey, do you want to book a meeting with me?" Boom, here's my Calendly link. Right? It's like, hey, do me a favor, right? I'm reaching out to you. Do me a favor. Click on this link and do some homework, right? If you're an SDR reaching out to somebody, you got to put the work in. At least the bare minimum that you can do in this situation is say, here are 2 times that work for me. Do either of these times work, right? And then if these times don't work, here's my Calendly so you can see that. And most times I find that actually gets a much better response rate than just simply, here's my Calendly, go for it. Yeah,
absolutely. So but you did mention a situation where you can use Calendly, and just to kind of emphasize this a little bit, you said, are you available Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or maybe are you available tomorrow or Friday? Or if it's easier, here's my Calendly link. And you kind of position the Calendly link as like, this is going to be easier for you. That is obviously action you want them to take.
Exactly.
But
I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to put the work in. And if you just reply back, I want to make it as easy as possible, right? The easiest possible thing for them to do is to reply back and say, yeah, Tuesday at 2 works best for me.
Yep. All right. 2 more questions as promised. How long should an email be? Or what's, we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
3.5 inches.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really varies. I've had some of our best email templates that were one paragraph, 1 or 2 sentences. I think a trend we've seen as you go more into the personalization, to the persona, they're getting longer and longer because you need to fill in more context. And I think the one thing that we're noticing is that people actually are willing to read and engage with that longer form content. So I think it's less about finding the exact word count, and it's more about sort of fitting the message that you want to get into the tactic that you're trying to employ. So if you're going to go general and say, hey, who should I talk to about this? Short and sweet might work. If you're going to try and go and be very targeted and very specific to that persona, a longer email might work as well. If you're going to be hyper personalized and you've done a ton of research, maybe you're going to get a little bit more leeway because you've put more effort into it. I think it really depends on the strategy that you're trying to employ. Sujan?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say shorter the sweeter. Like 9 times out of 10, short works better. In my opinion, you have to optimize for mobile, right? You also have to optimize for who you're selling to, and how many emails they get. And if they have somebody in the middle to kind of weed out emails or whatever, right? But generally I found shorter the better, because it's optimized for mobile. One thing, it doesn't matter about the length. I think something to think about that isn't very often mentioned is 1 email, 1 point to make, not 10 questions, not 13 places to look at. Here's this case study. Here's a video. Here's this. Let's set up a call. And here's a webinar we did. Join it. Or join our next webinar. Like that's too many things. 1 email, 1 point. That's kind of my rule of thumb. And it might take you a while to make that point, but so be it.
That's fantastic. I think the last question that we'll end with here, there's a few really quick ones. How do we not break any laws when we're sending cold email? Stay out of EU, stay out of Canada. I think that's the quickest answer I can give you. If you Google, can spam cold email, the regulations, the guidelines are super simple. That for a government website, they do a phenomenal job of spelling that out. But I think the last one we want to finish on is, how many emails are your SDRs sending per day, and how many emails per customer or per account are they reaching out to?
Account being like from their account, or like how many people?
Yeah, per company that they're targeting.
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of per day, I think it's the amount of, like, are you going the volume game? Are you trying to sell? Like, it's about, like, what's your goal? Like, what's your sales goal? Is it 5,000 customers? And is that like self-service? Is it an e-commerce product? Then maybe 5,000 is achievable with 20,000 emails sent. That sounds too unrealistic. Maybe 50,000 emails sent. But really, I don't know. I think that the number of day, the smaller you can get it, the better. Anytime you go into the thousands, 1,000 plus a day, generally is going to be a failing strategy. Again, in my opinion, per email address. If you have more than 1,000, send it from different emails, and fix that, because you will have a deliverability problem one way or another at some point.
Guaranteed. I think some numbers that I've seen on if you're doing a really high quality, highly personalized touch, 25 emails, net new emails a day, 25 to 50 in that range, depending on how deep you're going with the personalization. If you're going with more of a persona based, 100 to 150 net new emails a day, is going to give you a good amount. If you're hitting those, 3 to 10% response rates and you're getting good open rates, it's going to give you a lot to work with. In terms of the number of contacts I'd reach out to per account, I want to make sure that whatever tool I'm using is going to, handle that intelligently, and that it's not going to just email, 5 people at one account. So if they're going to do that, then I would build it on I build my lists as persona lists. So I'd have one job title from each company in that list so that I can just run it and go. And then I'd probably have a different persona. I'd have 4 or 5 different personas at that company, and you've got 4 or 5 different shots at their messaging. I think that's probably, regardless of the tool, if they have that intelligence stuff, that's probably the best way to go, because if you're, like we talked about earlier, personalizing it to the individual in their job role is probably one of the best ways to resonate at scale.
Yeah. And if you're doing persona based, I would suggest highly testing out that that's actually the right way to go. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you think it is because you got some success. And it could be, but like test it out before you try to figure out the right tools and whatnot to use it. I think if you want to try to do that, I don't really know that many tools that do a great job at persona based. You might need to get into like the sales law of outreach and
with persona based, it's just about how you build your list, right? In my opinion, right? You don't need anything fancy. You could do this in Mailshake. You just instead of trying to get all fancy in the tool, you just when you build the list, I'm only going to grab the chief farming purchasing products officer, at each of these companies. And then I'm going to go after the marketing person at each of these farms. And then I'm going to go after right. And you create your whole campaign, your whole messaging, your whole outreach strategy around that one persona. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Cool. So if people want to get in touch with you or find out some of the awesome stuff that you're doing, Sujan, what's the best way for them to find more?
So check out, you can always ping me at sujan@mailshake.com. Check out Mailshake or Voila Norbert. You might not be able to spell Voila Norbert. I know I can for the first time. So just Google it, or Norbert for short.
Google Translate, hello, Norbert. Perfect. And my name's Colin. Colin at Predictable Revenue is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. We're here. Most of my knowledge comes from, the things I've learned helping run our Accelerate team, which essentially, if you don't have tools or Hello Norbert and Mailshake, and you don't want to build an SDR team, we're essentially that stand-in team that can help book meetings for your sales team.
Highly recommend doing that while you try to figure out your own stuff, and you can blend the two together.
We do both all the time. People use this as a split test, as learning they want to see our playbook. We don't sell our playbooks, but we'll, do work on your behalf. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Great, man. Well, awesome. Thanks everybody for sticking around. Thanks, Sujan, for going over time. Appreciate it, man.
Take care, guys.
Catch you later.